Hello. I I suppose I should be beginning now. Is that what's happening? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining CrossTalk 2.0 tonight. This is our fourth in our five-part Crosstalk series. Each program features two different experts speaking on the same topic and focusing on this unusual moment in time. I am Michael Gitlitz, Executive Director of the Katonah Museum of Art, and also a member of the Crosstalk Committee. We are welcoming tonight two speakers who will be discussing their interpretation of the topic change. Our first speaker is Bisa Butler, a formerly trained artist whose vivid and complex portrait quilts examine African-American culture and identity. Her exhibition, Bisa Butler Portraits, is now on view at the newly reopened Katonah Museum of Art through October 4th, and I hope you will all come see it. This is the first solo exhibition of the artist's work in a museum, and it will then travel to the Art Institute of Chicago, but you can see it in Katonah, New York first. Our second speaker will be Dr. Michael Finkelstein, a traditionally trained physician in internal medicine who was a hospital medical director for 20 years before training in integrative and holistic medicine. He went on to create a health and wellness center called Sunraven and wrote Slow Medicine, Hope and Healing for Chronic Illness. He has been featured in top media outlets, including the New York Times, CNN, and Real Simple. Let's begin with Bisa Butler, followed by Michael Finkelstein. Then there'll be a brief conversation between the two of them, and we will conclude with a short Q&A. If you have questions you'd like to ask, please write them in the question box that you'll see when you click on your screen. Bisa, let's begin with you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I've been thinking about this topic of change and what it means to me personally. I mean, we've had a lot of things happen in a very short period of time. You know, we have the quarantine, the lockdown, fear of the pandemic, some people who are not afraid of the pandemic. I've personally experienced a lot of sadness and a lot of loss in this time. We've had a loss of our freedoms. And the thing that none of us really expected, of course, who expects a pandemic, but we didn't expect the fight against racial inequities that started after George Floyd was killed on May 25th. And that caused me to be a lot more introspective. My artwork has always dealt with the themes of African-American family, African-American identity, because it was my personal story. When I first started creating, I was doing images, quilts of my own family members. And then when I started working professionally, I started doing quilts of my broader Black diaspora family members, that ubiquitous grandmother, grandfather, especially because as African Americans, our families were broken apart when we were brought to this country back in the, for some of us, 1700s, early 1800s. And you'll see that when Black people call each other, hey brother, hey sister. That's in reference to us not knowing who is actually blood related to us. And this introspection made me think about, am I just portraying images of the Black family? But now what am I going to say that's going to be more intentional? So I felt like this change in the world caused me to change the way I'm working, for me to actually slow down and be more intentional. And for me to do that, I had to actually go forward before I could move. I had to go backwards, before I could move forward. I started reading the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I started reading African French philosophers like Frantz Fanon, the wretched, and other Black people do in situations of crisis or in times of great change. And reading those things gave me more of an idea. Well, I used to feel like, oh, I know about Frederick Douglass, sure, we all know about him. But when was the last time we actually read his words and took that into context? Then I started reading new books like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi and Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi. And these are new writers. So now I've got the past and I've got the present, and it made me be a lot more intentional about what I'm working on. I felt like I went from speaking softly in a way to speaking a lot more loudly. My work, there's some behind me, but it speaks for itself. But people were listening a lot more intently, and I had to be very careful to make sure that what I'm saying is actually pushing the conversation forward and helping African American people, helping American people in general, and being certain that what I'm saying is adding to the conversation and not taking away for it or inadvertently hurting Black people, like I've seen some people do.
Well, Bisa, I guess it's my turn to follow. And first, thank you so much for sharing something so heartfelt and genuine. I think it's fair to say, and I've heard this said before, that people who are not of color can't necessarily fully appreciate what people of color are going through right now. And I just wanted to humbly say that I put myself into that place of, sort of just not knowing and having to listen very carefully to what people are saying right now to open my mind and to help me really understand what got us to this point. To transition though to sort of the perspective that I'd like to share tonight myself, I want to speak from that place of another fellow traveler who grew up thinking that I was going to be a doctor at a very young age with the mind that I would help other people and I would help them out of pain, out of crisis, out of situations, and that Western medicine, science that I would learn would be really the answer. And it was going pretty well for a while. As Michael said in the introduction, I was the medical director of a hospital here in northern Westchester. I really achieved everything that I might have ever dreamed about achieving professionally, even personally. Everything was working. I had a family, 2 cars, a garage, that sort of quote unquote American dream. But what I realized was, and my mind was blown when I realized as powerful as the lessons of my learning in medicine, I wasn't helping people as well as I had wanted to. And it wasn't just the fact that they weren't physically getting better all the time. There are tremendous limits and limitations of the Western medical model. And it became evident to me that that was the case. And so I had to change. I had to change from something that I held on to really tightly from the age of 7, an image of myself that I would become. And having become that, realizing it wasn't sufficient. And what you shared, Bisa, and what I'm hearing now in the world, the unsettled times that we're experiencing because of this epidemic, but it's, of course, not the first one. People have been suffering with all sorts of waves of catastrophes throughout all of history, is that the constant in life, in human life, is change. And that when people resist change is when they become diseased. That the ease that we seek is to recognize the need for change, the call for change, and the adjustments that are required. As a physician, I see that then manifest in the body. When people have diseases, yes, there might be clear-cut medical explanations, like a virus. But what I am learning and have learned, and that I could share, is it's not just those things that affect us. Those are seeds that get planted into the soil of our being. And our being is composed of all of our life's experiences, even our past life experiences, and our connectedness. And when we are introduced to a seed that's planted in the soil of our life, it will either grow or not. If our soil is not healthy, then seeds that have destructive power will take root. And this is now my quest, is to help people change their vision, change their mind, to see that the body carries us only so far, that what we really need to become healthy and whole is to recognize our oneness, is to recognize that we're all brothers and sisters, to recognize that there's something inherently common in our lives that when we embrace, and we see that as the point of life, we can help each other. And when we help each other, of course, we feel well and others are more well. And so that's what I would say. Now, I want to sort of flip it back to you, Bisa, because you said a couple of things that struck me, and talking about how you needed to listen, and I just shared that I needed to listen. Listening is such an effective way of connecting with people, and of course, art and artistic expression is another way we connect with people, because you can communicate so deeply in the form of art if you're so talented, and it's something that I'm pretty envious about when people have that talent as well. But I happen to be a communicator, and listening is something that I also have to do very deeply. So you mentioned listening and connecting, and slowing. And I'm wondering, in your own openness, because all those things create openness, another word that you used, I'm wondering where you feel we are going now collectively. How do you feel we're doing? I mean, do you sense around us here that there is traction? What do you sense personally? That's my question.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's so hard to say, because obviously this great awakening, I don't think that the term has been coined yet about what has happened right now. Is it a racial awakening? Is it I don't know. It's not quite an uprising. It's like I feel like we're waking up as a country, and we're waking up to a lot of the untruths that have been told, like things like saying, like, racism is dead. Let's just start there. Then you'll see that we're not all on the same side, and that there are some people who feel like, they want, well, maybe they want a more racist society. I don't know. And then there's some people who feel that they didn't realize, and I feel like I myself too, I used to be a high school art teacher. There would be things that I would do that would uphold racist systems without realizing it. Even myself as a Black person, and white people too. Like, I think that we all are being shaken awake, and it's not easy. That's a transition. Yeah. So who knows what will come of that.
That's really quite honest. I think it's true for all of us that we may easily say to ourselves that we're awakening collectively, but each of us as an individual needs to face the mirror and look at ourselves and examine our own sort of way of being, so much shaped by culture, of course. And so that we have to give ourselves a little bit of a break at times. But once we wake up, once we see what we have been doing, I think it really begs us to make the adjustments. And then again, when we resist that, that's when we get diseased, and we get diseased as individuals. And I think we're seeing that when you say that there are people in culture who may want more racism, as an example, that I'd call resistance of another sort. And when there's that resistance, that creates a disease, a friction between groups of people. This fractionation, the polarity that we're seeing is anything but what we need. However, maybe it's going to lead to something good, because I think far more people are witnessing this and find that very unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree with you. You have to know what you're dealing with, so if you pull back the curtain and you know that some people are well-intentioned and some are not, I mean, in order for us to move forward, we do have to know what you're working with. And I think that there are a lot of people who are very well-meaning and want to do better and be better. And so I think that's great. But I don't want to be negative. It's really hard to say. I have thought about that we're all isolated, and that makes us be kind of more tribal, you're like me, but you're not like me, you're different. And we're trying to protect ourselves and we're afraid. But then I also see us getting out in the streets, and for me myself, a lot of people have been reaching to me and I'm reaching back to them, like, how can I help? What can I do? And that can be like by making artwork, or even like we're doing, having a conversation, or even like donating money like some people are doing. And I find myself doing, I think I must have donated more money at this time than I ever have. You know, every time you see something, you're like, oh, well, I want to be helpful. And I feel like a lot of people are feeling the same way.
Yeah. I think that we're seeing some of the best of human nature at this time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just too easy to look at, you know, mainstream media and what they're presenting as the whole story.
Right.
You know, it's keeps repeating itself, and the same images and the same commentary. But there's so much more to the true story of humanity right now, including all of those good things. Where certainly everyone who's listening right now is probably the type of person who does examine themselves, who's curious, who's learning and growing, and is, you know, sort of making the assumption that there's more for them to learn. And therefore this open-mindedness, I think, is such a healthy thing that I, of course, also want to be part of and encourage. And whenever people call me too, it's, what can I do for you? What, you know, I've been setting up consultations, you know, in my holistic medical practice, where I give away the first, you know, session, essentially, because I really just want to connect with people, and I want to find a way to help people shift their mind. If they can change their mind about what we're actually trying to accomplish here, they can get clearer on what they need to do.
Right, right. I think that's so important. And I like what you were talking about, just that mind and body connection, and how before this happened, maybe a lot of us were almost like sleepwalking, you know, everything is fine, but not really examining what we're doing every day. And now that a lot of people cannot go to work, or they cannot do what they used to do, they cannot hang out in the bars or whatever, depending on where you live anyway, if the bars are open. But you're not allowed to like anesthetize yourself. Right now, you're just gonna have to deal with yourself and see yourself. And I found like another positive thing about this is that slowing down of the world, so you can reassess.
Yeah.
Is this okay for me? Am I okay?
It's so interesting how, you know, I wrote this book, titled it Slow Medicine. People get very nervous about slowing down. You know, that gets people really anxious, you know, that not being busy, not doing things, not being productive, not accomplishing something. And
yeah,
it's interesting, but it's a paradox. When you do slow down, an effective type of slowing, it's not a stop. It's a slowing down so that essentially you can go within, you can go deeper inside of yourself. A lot of the movement that we keep ourselves busy with is to distract ourselves from those things that are going on inside. But when we have this opportunity, if we seize it, and we have practices of any sort where we can get more in touch with our soul level consciousness, you know, the body is, or the mind is so attached to the body and all the movement of the body and all the senses that the body is experiencing, the mind gets restless as a result. But when we slow the body down, and therefore the mind can slow down, we get a glimpse at some other type of consciousness that we're in possession of. In fact, it's our higher consciousness, which is this higher soul state, which is constant. It's the observer of everything that's going on. And it's the interface between all people, all consciousness. And this, to me, is a great opportunity to reach for that and see what's up there, to see how it's different. It's such a enlightened, beautiful, restful, peaceful state.
I definitely, I 100%. I think every time I'm working, I've been in that state. I mean, I'm cutting little tiny pieces, or I'm sewing, and it's sort of that kind of work. Like you might see a knitter, you know, you can just be doing this thing and your brain is going, like you said, into this other consciousness of thought. And it's a meditative state, and it's calming. And I actually had a period of time where my blood pressure was like going haywire. So the doctor had a monitor on me like 24 hours. Let's see what happens with your blood pressure in 24 hours. And I was teaching. I was a high school art teacher, so some things were fluctuating. And then the doctor looked at the reading and was like, "Well, what were you doing here?" And it was something like 4 o'clock in the afternoon till maybe 8. She's like, "Did you take a nap?" But that whole time I was working on my artwork, my pressure was actually lower than when I was asleep.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was just thinking, that you would find, as many artists do, as many people who get lost in some really deep activity where emotions are being expressed through the physical body, but it creates this new space of awareness. Those are the practices that help people. This is the best medicine for a disease of any sort.
right,
Michael,
I agree.
I just want to jump in here because there have been a couple of questions from participants in the audience, and I would love to pose them to you. This has been absolutely riveting, I have to tell you. So thank you. The first question is that you both reference the term slow, Bisa in terms of slowing down and thinking about your work more intentionally, and Michael in terms of slow, thoughtful, holistic medicine. Do you think this current slowing down during this coronavirus pandemic will continue after the pandemic, or will we go back to our old, fast, unmindful ways?
I mean, me personally, I feel like it's going to take a while. We've all been through a lot now, and some of us have actually been traumatized. And I think that eventually things will reset. It might be a little different, but I think it would take a while. And for some people, maybe their lives have changed so much. Like I'm thinking about people who've lost. A good friend of mine lost her mother. So her life will never be the same. She's not living at home with mom anymore. She's not there. So there are things that are going to change forever for some of us, and some might go back.
If I could add the perspective that when I think of the word slow, again, I don't think about stop. I think of just a different state of mind where one is more sensitive to other things that they would otherwise not be sensitive to when they're moving so quickly. So the fast world around us bombards us with all sorts of stimuli, and we still can get a lot of that stimuli because a lot of it's in the media. A lot of it's how we keep ourselves busy. But there is, especially during the periods of sheltering in place when people weren't getting out, there was somewhat of a rehearsal for what it's like to be less peripatetic, like all over the place. And the physical limitations that we self-imposed have a benefit. It's longer than it was after 9/11. People who lived in this area know that after 9/11, there were a couple of days or weeks where there was quite a lot of peace, and then it did revert. I feel that this may be one of the better opportunities we've had in my lifetime of that type of solemnity that allows us to really look at what we're doing, what we have been doing, how we got here. And I think more people will make some sort of change, whether the change is unfortunately imposed because of losses, like Bisa just mentioned, or just how people have woken up a little bit. And collectively, that's where the power is. If enough people do this, there is a critical mass of it. And that's what I hope for anyway. I encourage people to stick with a slower rhythm.
Those were two great answers. Another question which is directed towards Bisa, and I'm going to add an addendum to you, Michael. For Bisa, do you find that your process of art making or the choices that you're making as an artist have been changing in response to the political changes, specifically the national outcry at George Floyd's murder?
Definitely, yes. It's not what I've been saying that's changing. If I do an image of, let's say, an African-American family from the 1940s, so I'm still doing that image, but I'm being a lot more specific. I might put the image out there before and let people just take of it what they will without like telling them too much about it. Now I might specifically say, like, this family is leaving their home in the South because they were looking for a better life. So they went to the urban cities. And when they got there, it was not necessarily a better life. You know, a lot of times you saw the breakdown of the family structure itself. And people were used to being in nature, in grass and leaves, and taking care of their own crops and eating organically. And now you're in a food desert, you know, in Chicago or New York or St. Louis, and filled with urban blight. So I might specifically tell people why you need to pay attention to this image and how it relates to now. So I think that, yeah, it has changed what I'm saying, because I really had to be more, I felt like I went from speaking quietly to speaking more loudly.
That was a great answer. And Michael, to you, since there was this question that shifted us from the changes in the pandemic and the health of the world to the effects of the political climate, how do you see those two going together? In other words, have you, the way that you look at patients or the way you see people behaving with regard to their health has changed in response to what's gone on with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter?
You know, I would honestly say, yes, I see a change, and I see fear, and I see anger. Sometimes both of those are positive, by the way, because anger can motivate important changes, and fear could tell us to, you know, to protect ourselves. But there's a tremendous amount of fanning the flames of those emotions that I see in the media and in the political arena in particular. And I think the average person is, you know, while they might cognitively be able to discriminate and sort of know who's talking truth and who's, you know, being well-intended, but the energy of those emotions is so powerful. People are very sensitive to emotional waves, especially when they're so amplified, that when people are afraid and when people are angry, their body is not in a good place. The susceptibility to this virus, as an example, or to any sickness, is greater when people are angry chronically or fearful chronically. And I'm afraid that our politicians, even if they had the right answer, are not delivering the message well. And frankly, I'm not sure they have the right answer. This is a whole nother subject. I'm very concerned that we're hearing sound bites, even from the medical community, of ideas that are good educated guesses, but they may not be correct. And people are just taking this all in, and I think very confused, very distressed. So I'm not really comfortable. I'm not confident.
That was a fantastic answer. And just one last very quick question and answer. You've both spoken about external changes that surround you and the changes you've made in your own lives and behavior. Have you found yourself being more proactively changing or reactively changing? And you can go in either order you like.
I would say it's probably reactive. I feel like things are happening so fast around us, sort of evolving, and it's forcing me to catch up. And I'm actually happy about that. You know, it's forcing me to expand my mind and to think more deeply. And also the questions that you're asking are questions that I think about. What's going to happen 6 months from now? What is it going to be a year from now? And it's forcing me to make those sort of predictions.
What about you, Michael?
Well, I think that it's almost impossible to not be reactive when things are coming at you. But I am doing my best to stay calm in the midst of all of that. And that's an internal project. That's an inside game. I'm trying to collect myself on the highest level so that the storm that's blowing through right now will allow me to keep my eyes open and know what to do with the highest of my abilities, with wisdom, intellect, and heartfelt care. And that's what I'm trying to let guide me through this period.
Well, thank you, Bisa and Michael. We're so grateful for this conversation and that you have given us your precious time. This series has raised $8,000 so far for the community center's food bank, where there has been a tremendous surge in need during this difficult time. And we would love to raise a total of $10,000 during this series. So I hope that all of you out there can help us reach that goal. And thank you for your generous support. Please join us next Tuesday for the 5th and final program in the series, when we will be welcoming environmental reporter Andrew Revkin and Westchester Community College President Belinda Miles. Their topic of discussion will be uncertainty. Thanks again for tuning in. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.